Chapter 3. The Invisible Thread. You were never separate from any of this. I need to tell you something that is going to sound like the most out there thing you've read so far in this book. And then I'm going to prove it. Not with philosophy, not with spiritual belief, not with the kind of feel-good metaphysical hand-waving that makes technically minded people roll their eyes and put books like this down permanently. With physics. With actual peer-reviewed, documented, repeatable experimental science that has been confirmed and reconfirmed by some of the most rigorous minds in the history of human scientific inquiry. Here it is. You are not separate from the world you're trying to change. You never were. The distance between you and your partner asleep in the next room, not real. The distance between you and the stranger at the gas pump 2 states away, not real. The distance between you and the kid in a developing country who has never had clean water, not real. The distance between you and every other human being on this planet, between you and the stars visible on a clear West Texas night, between you and the very first moment of existence at the beginning of the universe itself. Not real. Not in the way you think it is. And the science that tells us this is not fringe. It is not theoretical in the way that some of the frameworks later in this book are theoretical. It is established, confirmed, Nobel Prize winning physics that has been shaking the foundations of how we understand reality since the 1960s. It's called quantum entanglement. And once you understand it, really understand it at the gut level, not just the intellectual level, it is going to change the way you see yourself in relation to everything around you. Forever. First, a little background on the very small. To understand quantum entanglement, we need to spend a few minutes in the world of quantum mechanics. And I want to be upfront with you right now. Quantum mechanics is genuinely strange. Not strange in the way that advanced calculus is strange, where it's just complicated and most people don't bother to learn it. Strange in the way that even the physicists who work with it every day openly admit that nobody fully understands why it works the way it does. Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists who ever lived, a man who won the Nobel Prize and spent his career thinking about this stuff, famously said that if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. So if what follows makes your brain feel slightly wobbly, that's not you failing to understand it. That's you correctly perceiving how genuinely weird the universe turns out to be at its most fundamental level. Quantum mechanics is the branch of physics that describes how matter and energy behave at the subatomic scale, at the level of electrons, photons, quarks, and all the other fundamental building blocks that everything in the universe, including you, is ultimately made of. And at that scale, reality does not behave the way it behaves at the scale we can see and touch. At the scale we can see and touch, what physicists call the classical scale, things are where they are. Your coffee cup is on the table. It is not simultaneously on the table and on the floor in some blurry, overlapping state of both possibilities. It is on the table, period. Classical physics, the physics of Newton and the physics that describes almost everything in our ordinary daily experience, is a physics of definite locations, definite states, definite outcomes. Quantum mechanics is not that. At the quantum scale, particles don't have definite locations or definite states until something interacts with them and forces them to resolve into one. Before that interaction, they exist in what physicists call a superposition, a simultaneous overlap of multiple possible states. The particle isn't here or there. It's in a kind of smeared-out probability cloud of here and there and everywhere in between until the moment of observation collapses that probability cloud into a single definite outcome. This is not a metaphor. This is not a philosophical position. This has been experimentally demonstrated thousands of times with extraordinary precision. The quantum world is genuinely and irreducibly probabilistic in a way that nothing in our everyday experience prepares us for. And the strangest part, the part that leads us directly to entanglement, is what happens when two quantum particles interact with each other. Spooky action at a distance. In 1935, Albert Einstein, along with his colleagues Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen, published a paper that was intended to demonstrate a flaw in quantum mechanics. Einstein was deeply uncomfortable with the probabilistic nature of quantum theory. He famously said that God does not play dice with the universe, meaning he believed that the apparent randomness of quantum mechanics was a sign that the theory was incomplete, that there were hidden variables underneath the quantum weirdness that would eventually explain everything in good classical deterministic terms. The paper Einstein published, known as the EPR paper after its author's initials, described a scenario that seemed to create an absurd consequence if quantum mechanics was taken at face value. If two particles interact and then separate, quantum mechanics predicts that their properties remain correlated in a very specific way. Measuring one particle instantly determines the corresponding property of the other particle, no matter how far apart they are. No matter if they're on opposite sides of the room. No matter if they're on opposite sides of the planet. no matter if they're on opposite sides of the galaxy. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance, and he meant it as a criticism. He argued that this couldn't possibly be real because it would require information to travel between the two particles faster than the speed of light, which his own theory of relativity said was impossible. Therefore, quantum mechanics must be wrong or incomplete. For nearly 30 years, this was a theoretical debate with no way to resolve it experimentally. Then in 1964, a physicist named John Bell figured out a way to test it. He developed what became known as Bell's theorem, a mathematical framework that made specific predictions about how entangled particles would behave if Einstein was right versus how they would behave if quantum mechanics was right. It was a decisive test, a way to actually find out who was correct. The experiments began in the early 1970s and have been repeated and refined and made progressively more rigorous ever since. The results have been consistent every single time. Einstein was wrong. Quantum mechanics was right. Entangled particles really do remain correlated across any distance instantaneously. Measuring one really does instantly determine the state of the other, no matter how far apart they are. The universe really does have this deeply strange property of non-locality. The property that what happens here can be instantaneously connected to what happens there in a way that has nothing to do with signals traveling through space. In 2022, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Alain Aspect, John Clauser, and Anton Zeilinger for their experimental work confirming quantum entanglement beyond any reasonable scientific doubt. This is not fringe science. This is not speculation. This is the most rigorously confirmed experimental result in modern physics, honored with the highest award in science. The universe is non-local. Separation is not what it appears to be. Things that have interacted remain connected across any distance in ways that classical physics has no framework to explain. Let that land for a second. What this has to do with you. Now, here's where we make the leap that I want to be completely transparent about. What I just described, Bell's theorem, quantum entanglement, non-locality, that's established science. Rock solid. Nobel Prize confirmed. Not debatable among serious physicists. What comes next is where we move from established science into theoretical territory. And I promised you at the beginning of this book that I would always tell you clearly when we're crossing that line. So here it is. The following is theoretical. It is informed by the science we just discussed. It is taken seriously by a growing number of researchers in consciousness studies and quantum biology. But it is not yet established science in the same way that Bell's theorem is established science. With that clearly stated, here's the question that I think is the most important question in this entire book. If quantum entanglement is real, if particles that have interacted remain connected across any distance instantaneously, what does that mean for the particles that make up you? Every atom in your body was forged in the nuclear furnace of a star. Every particle in those atoms has been interacting with other particles since the very beginning of the universe itself. The Big Bang wasn't just the start of things. It was the moment when everything that would ever exist was in direct contact with everything else that would ever exist. In the language of quantum mechanics, the entire universe began in a state of perfect entanglement. An entanglement, once established, doesn't just go away. The theoretical implication, and again I'm flagging this clearly as theoretical, is that you are not a separate, isolated consciousness moving through an indifferent universe. You are a node in a web of connection that extends in every direction across every distance to every other node that has ever existed. Your particles have history with the universe's particles. Your body is made of star stuff that has been entangled with other star stuff since before the Earth existed. The separation you feel, the sense of being a lone consciousness in a vast and indifferent cosmos, may be the most profound illusion the human nervous system has ever generated. You were never actually alone in here. And the implications of that for how we think about the law of attraction, about how individual consciousness might interact with and influence the world around it, are staggering. The observer effect, when looking, changes everything. There's another piece of quantum mechanics I need to introduce here because it connects directly to everything we're building toward in this book. It's called the observer effect, and it is, I want to be careful with my language here, one of the most genuinely mysterious and hotly debated phenomena in all of science. You may have heard of the double-slit experiment. If you haven't, let me walk you through it because it is the single most important experiment in the history of physics, and its implications have never been fully resolved despite more than a century of trying. Here's the setup. You take a barrier with two narrow slits cut into it. You fire particles, electrons, photons, even whole atoms, at the barrier one at a time. On the other side of the barrier, you have a detector screen that records where each particle lands. Here's what you'd expect to happen. The particles go through one slit or the other and hit the screen. You'd expect to see two bands of impact marks on the screen corresponding to the two slits. Here's what actually happens. You see an interference pattern, not two bands, a series of alternating light and dark bands that extends across the entire screen. This is the pattern you'd expect if waves were going through both slits simultaneously and interfering with each other on the other side. But we're not firing waves. We're firing individual particles, one at a time. The only explanation quantum mechanics offers is that each individual particle goes through both slits simultaneously as a wave of probability and interferes with itself on the other side before landing at a single point on the detector. Each particle exists as a superposition of possibilities, going through the left slit and the right slit and everywhere in between, until the moment it hits the detector and collapses into a single definite outcome. Strange enough, but here's where it gets truly mind-bending. Physicists naturally wanted to know which slit each particle actually went through, so they set up detectors at the slits to observe the particles in transit and find out. The interference pattern disappeared. The moment observation was introduced, the moment a measuring device was set up to determine which slit the particle went through, the particles stopped behaving like waves and started behaving like classical particles going through one slit or the other. The interference pattern collapsed into the two simple bands you'd expect from particles. The act of observation changed the behavior of the particles. Not because the detectors physically disturbed the particles, physicists have been extraordinarily careful to rule out mechanical interference. The change appears to be a fundamental consequence of the act of measurement itself, of information being acquired about the system, of the universe being observed. Now, here is where I need to be scrupulously honest with you because this experiment has been wildly misrepresented in the law of attraction community, and I refuse to do the same thing. The observer in the double-slit experiment is not necessarily a conscious human mind. In the strictest scientific sense, the observer is any physical interaction that acquires information about the system, including a purely mechanical detector with no consciousness involved whatsoever. The collapse of the wave function does not require a human being to be looking. It requires an interaction that records information. So the leap from the double-slit experiment to your conscious attention literally collapses reality into being is a bigger leap than it's often presented as. I want you to know that. I want you to have the honest version. That said, here is what is genuinely true and genuinely remarkable and genuinely relevant to everything this book is about. Consciousness is a physical process. It produces measurable electromagnetic fields. It is made of the same particles subject to the same quantum mechanical rules as everything else in the universe. And the question of exactly how and whether conscious observation plays a special role in the collapse of quantum wave functions is not settled science. It is an open question, a genuinely open question being actively investigated by serious physicists and consciousness researchers right now in 2026. The honest position, the one I'm taking in this book, is this. We don't know exactly how consciousness interacts with quantum mechanics, but the quantum universe is demonstrably responsive to observation in ways that classical physics cannot explain. And consciousness is demonstrably a physical phenomenon that interacts with the physical world. The theoretical bridge between those two facts is not crazy. It is not pseudoscience. It is a legitimate area of scientific inquiry that is younger and less certain than we'd like, but points in a direction that anyone paying attention should find very interesting. Especially anyone who has spent years watching their own focused conscious attention help shape outcomes in their life in ways that pure coincidence struggles to explain. Napoleon Hill knew something. Napoleon Hill had never heard of quantum entanglement. He had never heard of the observer effect or wave function collapse or non-locality. He was writing in the 1930s, decades before Bell's theorem and half a century before the Nobel Prize confirmed entanglement experimentally. But read Think and Grow Rich with what you now know about quantum mechanics, and something remarkable happens. The language maps almost perfectly. Hill talks about the mastermind principle, the idea that when two or more minds come together in a spirit of harmony and definite purpose, something happens that is greater than the sum of its parts. He describes it as a third mind that emerges from the combination. An invisible force that connects the members of the mastermind group in a way that amplifies the power of each individual beyond what they could achieve alone. In the language of quantum mechanics, what Hill is describing sounds remarkably like entanglement. Two conscious systems that have interacted, that have aligned their frequencies, their intentions, their definite chief aims, creating a correlated state that persists and amplifies across the connection between them. Hill talks about the importance of definiteness of purpose, of holding a single clear, unwavering image of the desired outcome in your mind with such intensity and persistence that it becomes a kind of obsession. He says that the subconscious mind responds to this sustained focused attention in ways that begin to rearrange circumstances toward the desired outcome through means that the conscious mind cannot fully track or understand. In the language of quantum mechanics, what Hill is describing sounds remarkably like the observer effect, a sustained conscious observation collapsing probability into outcome. Not instantaneously, not magically, but through the accumulated effect of sustained focused attention directing energy and action and recognition of opportunity in ways that gradually harden a desired reality out of the fog of infinite possibility. Hill didn't have the scientific framework, but he had decades of evidence from studying 500 of the most successful people of his era. And what he observed in them, the patterns, the practices, the mental habits that correlated with extraordinary outcomes, maps onto quantum mechanical principles in ways that I find impossible to dismiss as coincidence. He was watching the physics even if he couldn't name it. What this means for us right now. Let's bring this all the way back to 2026 and 89 seconds to midnight. If quantum entanglement is real, and it is, then the separation between human beings is fundamentally illusory at the deepest level of physical reality. We are all nodes in a web that has been entangled since the beginning of time. What affects one of us ripples through the web in ways that science is only beginning to measure and understand. If the observer effect is real, and it is, then focused conscious attention has a demonstrable effect on the physical world at the quantum level, even if we don't yet fully understand the mechanism by which that effect operates at the scale of human experience. And if Hill's mastermind principle maps onto quantum entanglement the way I believe it does, if groups of human beings who align their conscious attention toward a shared definite purpose create a kind of coherent quantum field that amplifies the effect of individual observation, then the implications for what a critical mass of awakened intentional human beings could do to the collective reality of this planet are not small. They are enormous. Think about what we're proposing, not as magical thinking, as a theoretical extension of confirmed physics applied to the scale of human civilization. 8 billion entangled nodes, all of us made of particles that have been in contact with each other and with the rest of the universe since the Big Bang. All of us generating electromagnetic fields with our brains and hearts that radiate outward into the shared environment. All of us broadcasting a frequency that contributes to the collective signal of our species. Right now, most of those 8 billion nodes are broadcasting fear and scarcity and the low-frequency hum of people who don't know they have power. But what if enough of them shifted? What if enough of them did what you did in Chapter 2? Looked honestly at their signal, identified their actual vision, and started consciously directing their attention toward the outcome they actually want instead of the one they're afraid of? What if the mastermind principle scaled to civilization level? What if the invisible thread that quantum physics tells us connects every particle in the universe, the thread that connects you to your boys, to your partner, to the strangers at the gas pump, to the kid who has never had clean water, to everyone? What if enough of us started pulling on that thread deliberately, in the same direction, at the same time? I don't know exactly what would happen. Nobody does. The science isn't there yet to make precise predictions at that scale. But I know what happened to the doomsday clock the 2 times in history when enough human beings shifted their collective consciousness toward cooperation and away from destruction. It moved back, both times, against the entropy, against the inertia of systems that seemed too large and too powerful to change. People first, physics second. The invisible thread pulled taut by enough hands pulling in the same direction. That's what we're building toward in this book. Not a miracle, not magic. A critical mass of conscious, intentional human beings who understand that they are not separate from the world they want to change, who understand that the separation was always the illusion, and who are willing to use that knowledge to shift the signal of this planet before the clock runs out. You are not alone in here. You never were. And neither is anyone else. The entanglement visualization, your first practice. Before we get to Chapter 4 and the dedicated practice, Chapter 1, want to give you something to carry with you right now. A seed to plant before we come back and water it properly. The next time you feel completely alone, the next time the gap feels too wide and the signal feels too weak and the world feels too big and too broken for anything you do to matter, I want you to try something. Close your eyes. Take a breath slow enough that you can feel your heartbeat. And then I want you to imagine, as vividly as you can, the invisible thread, the quantum connection that physics tells us is real, the entanglement that has existed since the beginning of time between every particle in your body and every particle in the universe. Picture it extending outward from you in every direction, to your boys, to your partner, to the people you work with, to strangers you've never met in cities you've never visited, to the mom on her Kindle, to the kid over the fire barrel, to the veteran under the bridge. To every human being alive on this planet right now, all of them made of the same star stuff, all of them carrying the same entanglement, all of them connected to you and to each other by a thread that no distance and no difference and no amount of fear or division or entropy can actually sever. Feel the weight of that connection, the reality of it. The fact that you are not a lone signal in a void, but a node in a web of 8 billion nodes, all of them part of the same entangled system, all of them capable of shifting their frequency, all of them needed. Hold that for as long as you can. That feeling, that sense of connection that is not sentimental but physical, not metaphorical but real, that is what we're going to learn to access deliberately, consistently, and powerfully in the chapters ahead. Because the thread is real, and it's time we started using it. Chapter 4 is the dedicated practice chapter for everything we just covered. We're going to build the full entanglement visualization from the seed we just planted. We're going to learn how to phase lock your brain's electromagnetic field with the Earth's own frequency, the Schumann resonance, and what that synchronization actually feels like and why it matters. And we're going to give you the first concrete daily practice that begins shifting your signal from the frequency of an isolated individual trying to survive to the frequency of a conscious node in an entangled web that is actively shaping reality. This is where the theory becomes something you can actually feel. Keep going.